What's up everyone, Laser here. Today we are going to run down some of the patch notes and I'm going to pick out who I think are the biggest winners on the patch. The ones that I'm most excited to experiment with, the ones that I think could obviously slot in somewhere, and all in all just cards that really have my attention. The patch has a lot of really important changes. I'm not going to go over all of them. A couple people like Corey Millhouse have gone over like every change in the patch. So I'm not going to do that this time. If you want to get some opinions on that, there are plenty of sources. I'm just going to highlight a couple that I think are really interesting. So let's get into it with number 1. Before we get to the 5 that I want to highlight, though, I do want to give an honorable mention to K9 Cavalry, who went from literally unplayable to best boy. He is recurring +1/+1. I think that's just your opponent's not going to power that often, right? Like, it's a tech card against powering, but hey, he's adorable. And now he's not completely unplayable. Woo! Number 1 is going to be Tyr Monamund. You can see that he is still a 5 mana 2 blue gems, still a 4/5, but his effects have changed pretty substantially. First of all, he no longer has Focus 2, which I think is kind of a net neutral thing given the rest of the changes. I don't think that's too big of an issue. It was definitely kind of nice to have it if you know, you were in a situation where you wanted to trade or if you had a clear lane ahead of you to attack into, but overall, it's not the hugest thing to lose. And he no longer gets Frenzy until end of turn when another enemy or another minion dies on your own turn. Instead, he has Frenzy naturally. Now that in itself is enormous. Unconditional Frenzy is huge. That means he now carries buffs like a madman and can just get in for a lot of damage if left undisturbed. And he also has Demise, returns to owner's hand if it attacked this turn. What that means is you can use this to trade into something with that Frenzy. Maybe you attack twice, maybe you clear off 2 things. Then if it dies, it comes back to your hand and you can just play it again. This is really high value, really strong stats with the Frenzy effect onto it. I think this is going to make this card very strong in some of those aggro or mid-range blue decks. I think this now has a pretty good slot into Valkyries if you want to stay mono blue. And I think a lot of mid-range strategies that blue is using, like my orange-blue Stompy that I've been playing on a couple videos, that's a ton of fun, go check it out, link in the description, would definitely love this kind of effect. I think it's going to slot into a lot of places that Solomon's Gale would slot into because it has a relatively similar effect of snowballing the board if you can get value. So I think this card is really strong now and definitely one that you should look to play. Number 2 is going to be Night Hag. This card is still a 3 mana double green gem for a 2/4 spirit, and instead of awaken, a minion in the opposite lane is stunned until Night Hag moves or leaves play. It now says a minion in the opposite lane is stunned until Night Hag leaves play. Not moves, just leaves play. This is insane! Like, people were playing as many copies of Meso Libre as they could possibly fit in green-yellow control because it was such a good way of stalling out opponents, because you could use it to really negate any tempo gain that they had on a turn just by delaying them for 1 turn. 1 turn was all Meso Libre could delay you by, and it had to be nerfed to a 3/3 this patch. Night Hag says it's stunned indefinitely. That's nuts! I think this card is now going to be such a really good tempo tool for green. I think green is becoming a really good tempo color all around. It has a lot of cards that can slow your opponents down between detained to ported. Now Night Hag, Turso is really good at it. Green just has so many tools to do board interaction tempo gains and recapturing of tempo that's really interesting. And I really like that direction for the color. I think Night Hag is a very strong card now. It is still easily answered as a 4, but a lot of times if your opponent can't answer it, they just don't get to use that minion for a while. And if they have something really troublesome that you don't have an answer for yet, but you want to not have to deal with for any time soon, plop down a Night Hag on it and you can either deal with it later, or if it's threatening some of your minions, then you can move them out of the way so that they can't be threatened by it. This card has so many uses, and I think it's just so strong right now. I may be wrong about this one. This one's kind of my hot take, but I think this card is busted. I really can't wait to try this one out. Number 3 in orange is going to be Shadhavar Beast. I think this card is now incredibly interesting to look at. Still a 3 mana 1 orange gem for a 3/3 unicorn, which is just awesome because it's a unicorn. Look at that thing, it's majestic as all hell. But it now says minions in the opposing 3 lanes have -1, 0, and fragile 1, as opposed to just having -1, -0. Adding on fragile here makes this a really interesting card to me. Let's imagine a scenario. Playing orange, you have Parser Recruits and Shot of Our Beast in your opening hand. That recruit now is a beast of a trading tool. Shot of Our Beast basically gives your opponent -1, -1 if you consider fragile like basically a -1 toughness, which in more situations than not is kind of an apt comparison. There are occasions where that's not the case, but edge cases. This is a place for hyperbole and hype, not edge cases. There are so many ways that orange has to get little things out that can just eke out incremental advantage, or that can eke out card draw and card advantage over time. Now Shot of Our Beast offers a way to offer board advantage to go alongside that kind of grindy tokeny playstyle that you can lean into with orange, or if you're going the orange controlling route, you can use Shot of Our Beast now to enhance all of that control that you can. If you pair it with blue, things like Thunderclap or Cataclysm now are way more effective. You're doing 3 damage of these instead of 2, which can be an enormous breakpoint for a lot of things. Think Anyar Thane, think Xerxian Recruiter. So the other thing is now that this offers both an offensive and a defensive utility. Before it was strictly defensive. All it did was help you value trade, but now it's helping you value trade and also trade up. It has that -1 is still very good, still very relevant because it's a nice defensive tool, but the fragile one offers an aggressive edge to it too that I think is incredibly interesting. I don't know for a fact that this is going to be an auto slot into all orange decks, far from it, but I do think there are decks where this has a valid shot of being a very, very useful card, and one that you probably like from maybe 2 of. I don't think you run 3, but I think this is a 2 of is really interesting to me. I think it definitely has a good amount of potential. Number 4 is going to be Mind Freak. This card is so good now. What the hell? This card's insane. 1 mana, 1 purple. Look at an enemy player's hand and choose a card. It becomes ephemeral and its mana cost increases by 3. So before it only increased the mana by 2. So you were basically paying 1 mana to increase by 2, so that's a net it's a net mana advantage of 1. Now you're spending 1 to increase it by 3. The net mana increase by 2. You're basically giving yourself mana advantage by making it so that they can't play their cards. Being able to disrupt cards on curve is insanely powerful. It's really, really hard to adapt your plan when you're having a very clear idea of what you want to play, and then suddenly something happens when you just can't do it anymore. The adaptation that you're forcing onto your opponent can be very, very hard. The other thing is that increasing by 3 is insanely, it's huge. There are some cards you just completely shut off, anything that costs 8, 9, or 10, which there aren't many of those cards, but there are some, and making them basically unplayable is ridiculous. Things that at 6 and 7, there are a lot of cards that are played there. I think there's 5 as well. Think like Magnus Thorson costing 8. That card's terrible now. If that costs 8, you would never play that in a deck. And you're only doing it for 1 mana. There are a lot of turns where you float a mana because you just didn't have a mana efficient thing to do. Even if you play this on turn 1, if they have a strong turn 1 play, if they want to play like a Daring Trapezist off of the Mystic Leprechaun's coin from the path going second, then they suddenly just can't do that. And that is enormous. Being able to shut off an opponent's play, especially if something really scary is coming down the pipe, can be backbreakingly good. I think that's one of the interesting things about this card is that it's good both in the early game and in the late game. It's really flexible. You can burn it if you don't need it, but I think this is one card that you really, really want to splash purple for in a lot of decks. Like, I could see a lot of control decks right now. Like, take yellow-green control, for example. It's still a solid deck. It's definitely weaker than it was before the patch, but it's still playable. You just do a small splash for purple to put in Mind Freak, disrupt enemy plays in control mirrors. This card gets bonkers. Like, say your opponent puts out, I don't know, like a Sapo in their deck, suddenly they just can't play it when it's relevant. I think this card is insanely, insanely good. The tempo that you can deny from your opponent is ridiculous, and then you can use it if you're an aggressive deck to protect your board from any board clears or from any targeted removal. This card's busted, dude. Play this card. And number 5, my personal pick for the biggest buff in the patch, and I don't even think it's close. Master of Shadows is immortal now. Master of Shadows is immortal now. Master of Shadows is immortal now. What the hell? You can't kill it unless you banish it. And there are very, very few cards in this game that banish, and one of the most popular ones, Gigantomachia, doesn't even hit this because it doesn't have enough toughness. This card is now stupidly good. It has stealth, so you don't know when it's being played. Granted, there aren't a lot of 4-cost stealth minions that are being played right now, but I guess like if you're playing a stealth deck, then sure, it could. He's deadly, which will always be relevant. He can trade into literally anything, which is just a really, really nice place to be. And he's immortal. There's an immortal 1/1 with deadly in the game. That is a disgustingly good card. Like that in itself would probably be playable in at least some decks. Not a lot, but there's probably some decks that would play it. The fact that you can just run away to the other side of the board means that it's a little narrow. There are definitely ways to play around. Sure, no problem. But you're taking away almost all board information from your opponent with the fact that the minions you create get stealth for as long as Master of Shadows is on board. Information in a card game is the most powerful tool that anyone can use. If you know what your opponent is going to do, you can play accordingly, and if you know what your opponent has, or what they don't have rather, then you know when you can go ahead and push an advantage. Suddenly, Master of Shadows comes along and says your opponent doesn't get to know anything that's going on in the game. They have to try and divine based on mana costs and gem costs, which if this card becomes meta will be a lot easier, but for now that this deck isn't meta and it isn't being played by everybody, your opponent isn't going to be able to guess what it is every single time. There are definitely some, I don't want to say workarounds, some tells. Awaken effects will still go off, so if you play like purple yellow control and you play a Miso Libre, the fact that your minion is stunned means they're going to know it's a Miso Libre. Sure, that's fine, but there's still a lot of minions that are still going to get stealth, and this is still an immortal deadly. Guys, I think this card's nuts. The thing is, I don't think you want to play like a stealth roleplay deck. I think those decks are still bad. The other stealth minions aren't good enough to warrant it. But if you're just playing like really good purple cards, or they're like a mid-range beatdown kind of thing where they don't know how big of a thing you are, and they don't know what removal to use, that's insane. If you're just playing purple yellow control and they don't know which of the, interesting minions you played, like is it a maze of it Yaku, or is it one of the other 1-drops that I think are like actually sincerely better now that red blue is worse off, but that's a different video. I just think this card has so many interesting uses. I cannot wait to do some fun stuff with this, especially because this was the first prestige mythic I ever pulled. So yeah, that's coming in the future. This card's I think it's insane. I think there's probably going to be a lot of really bad decks that are running it, so it's going to not seem to be very good because the deck it's in isn't very good, but I think eventually someone will find a home for this deck and it'll be crazy. It'll be nuts. And there we go. That's my pick for 5 interestingly buffed cards, as well as 1 good boy honorable mention. So now I want to hear what you think. Did I miss a card that is just absolutely crazy now? Are there other cards that you're really, really excited to try out, even if they might not be particularly insane? Leave a comment. Let me know on Twitter. I love hearing what you guys think. Next up, I'm going to be playing with a couple of these new cards, well, new buffed cards in a couple upcoming videos. I think the next one is going to be a video of a deck made by one of my teammates, E-Robert. Great guy, very, very skilled player. He comes up with some really fun decks. It's gonna be a fun one. I think you're gonna like it. And if there's anything you would like to see on the channel after all of these buffed cards have come through, please let me know. I always love catering to my audience, letting you guys see what it is you want to see. Until then, I am LaserGician. I can't wait to hear what you guys think, and I'll see you next time.